Yeah.
Tatiana, remind me where you're calling in from.
So I'm from Toronto in Canada. So yeah, so it's nice outside right now, but winter is going to probably start in a month and last until April. So
Winter
not
is
looking forward
coming,
to
huh?
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I
John,
guess you're in New York, right? So I think we have kind of like
mhm.
similar weather at this point.
Yeah, for sure. I
Hmm.
mean, I'm not, it's already starting to cool off a little bit, and I'm
Hmm.
like, I'm not ready for it. Although I do really like sweaters, so I have a
Yeah,
little bit of mixed feelings about it.
sweater
So,
weather. Yes, I'm a basic white girl. I love pumpkin spice. So I am excited to drink all things pumpkin spice for the next few months.
that is gonna be good. That's gonna be
Yeah,
good. I
yeah.
do like a pumpkin. I like pumpkin beer. I'm excited for pumpkin
Oh, okay.
beer. That's my
I have not tried that, but I
It's
love pumpkin
good.
coffee so much that I'm like I'm willing to branch out into other kinds of drinks. So, I'll trust you.
Yeah, awesome. I see a few comments coming in.
Mhm.
For those that are confused about the notes and recordings, $30 includes both day one and day two of all of the notes and recordings. So I guess you can think of $15 a day. But yeah, you get everything for $30, and that's only through the end of the summit. So I recommend that you take advantage of the notes and recordings. It goes up to $60 after Thursday. So so take a look at those notes and recordings. And then yeah, I am so excited. I know we're getting close to time,
Mhm.
and I know you have a few polls coming up, but
Mhm.
are there any questions that you want to just ask the audience ahead of time? I know there's a lot of Canadian organizations here too, so
Oh, cool.
yeah.
Yeah, I think actually most of the organizations that we work with, so most of the stuff in the survey that I'm going to be presenting is from US organizations. I just happen to be Canadian, but most of the people we do work with are from the US. So it's kind of a mixed bag there.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I would say I'm just looking forward to hearing everyone's questions about virtual events. I hope that the survey that I'm going to be talking about and the results that I'm going to be sharing are like relevant to all of you. I also feel like, from what I've seen of this summit, this is a really good example of a virtual event. Like, it seems really cool. Like, there's lots going on. There's lots of engagement. It's not just like, even right now, it's not just like me talking to a screen. So I think you guys have done a really good job with that too.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you for being here. I'm so excited.
Thanks.
It's so good because I don't know. It's just there hasn't been a lot. I have seen other virtual events, of course, in our space, but
Mhm.
I just really do think that we have such a fun set of speakers and
Mhm.
engaging speakers, and so thank you for being one of them and being part of it. So
Thanks.
yeah, excited to have you here. I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen so you can
Okay.
get set up with your screen sharing, and then you can start whenever you're ready. So I know
Okay.
we're starting maybe a couple minutes early, but
Cool.
feel free
Here, I will
to,
share
and
my
I will
screen.
get the polls ready.
Cool. All right. Can you see my screen?
Perfect. Looks good.
Great. I'll also just drop so the report that I'm talking about, I'm just going to go ahead and drop that link into the chat as well, so that if at any point you want to refer to it during my presentation or just want to download it to like refer to after, you can go ahead and do that. Oh wait, I guess I can't do that while I'm sharing my screen. So, oh, here we go.
And for anyone that has questions throughout this session, feel free to put them in the Q&A. That'll be the easiest way for us to keep track of all of those questions, and we can get to
Mhm.
those at the end. So looking forward
Yep.
to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I will be taking a look at the questions and, depending on how much time we have at the end of this session, hopefully I can answer a few. We're also going to be, like Wild Apricot will also be running a kind of a similar session to this, but it'll just be a Q&A. So if you did end up having questions that were unanswered, I'm going to be talking about this again on September 10th. So if you can hold on to your questions for a couple of weeks, then, you can go ahead and ask me then as well.
Awesome. All right.
Yeah,
Well, thanks,
cool.
Tatiana. I'm so excited. Tatiana Morand is the content manager at Wild Apricot. She runs all the content there. Very impressive work. Take a look at their blog. Also, take a look at their product. Amazing stuff for membership management. And I'll let Tatiana take it from here.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your great introduction, Candace. I really appreciate it. Yes, so as Candace mentioned, my name is Tatiana. Hello. I'm the content manager over at Wild Apricot. We make membership management software. So, you can we have a member database, a website builder, you can send out emails, all that kind of stuff. And our audience is primarily like small to mid-sized associations, clubs, and nonprofits. Something we noticed this year was that a lot of organizations we worked with, and just a lot of other organizations in the space, were having to transition over to virtual events because of COVID-19. We've all had to deal with it. It's just our new reality now. But a lot of things that we were noticing was that organizations just weren't really sure what best practices were. If they had never run virtual events before, they just weren't really sure, how to get started, what kinds of events to do, how to fundraise at these events. So we decided to run a virtual event research report to learn more about what nonprofits, clubs, associations were doing to run virtual events. So, this is the cover of our research report. That's the research report I dropped in the chat as well if you wanted to have a look through and see what we discovered. Otherwise, just keep listening. I'm going to go over some of our top findings around kind of the state of virtual events and some ideas that you can use to run your own virtual event as well. So just to give you a little bit more background about our virtual event survey, we heard from over 1,000 respondents, so 1,142. 20% of those self-described as nonprofits, as I'm guessing most of you in the audience here today will as well. 43% were associations, 17% were clubs, and then the remaining 19% or so were other types of organizations, so like subscription websites, event organizers, that kind of thing. Most of these respondents were also like mid-sized organizations, so between 100 to 500 members, 43%. We had actually another 19% that was quite small organizations, so between 1 to 50 members. And then we had another 20% who were over 1,000 members. So again, kind of in that small to mid-sized range, just because that's where, Wild Apricot, that's kind of the market we serve. So that's the people we have the most connections with, and that's who we heard from. The one thing I thought was interesting too was that a lot of these organizations, the majority, 61%, have actually been around for more than 20 years. So these are quite long-lived organizations that we heard from. They've weathered a lot of crises in their lifetime, and they're not going to let this pandemic get them down either. They want to run virtual events and just keep persevering. The next largest segment at 19% was actually organizations who had been around from 11 to 20 years. So still quite long-lived, still organizations that have been around for a while, even if some of them are on the smaller side. So it's pretty cool to think that they've been around for a while and they're still going to stay around through running virtual events. So in this presentation, I'm going to be covering the kind of 3 main topics that we covered in our virtual events research report. So I'm going to start by going over the virtual event landscape in 2020. So kind of what kinds of events are happening, how many organizations are running events, how successful these events are, that kind of thing. Next, I'm going to be discussing how organizations are gaining revenue from virtual events. So kind of around ticket pricing, fundraising, that kind of thing. And lastly, I'm going to be discussing how to attract and engage attendees through virtual events. So what kind of numbers people are seeing for attendees at their virtual events, and how they're making sure that once they have those attendees there, they're actually making their events engaging and interactive and all that kind of stuff. So as just an example, I'm going to be just pretending that I'm part of a beekeepers association. So maybe I'm their events coordinator or their membership coordinator, and I'm reading through this report and interpreting it through the lens of my organization and thinking okay, my organization has historically just run in-person events. Now we want to move to the virtual space. How can we proceed and how can we run those kind of events more effectively, trying to use what we can learn from this report to do that. Also, just to be clear, I am not part of a Beekeepers Association. I just really like bees. I think they're really cool. So if you are part of a Beekeepers Association and you're like, what is this girl talking about? Like, this is a weird example. Just, please forgive me. Just know that I appreciate you because bees are really cool. That's my caveat. So with that little framework and that kind of little example in mind, I'm just going to dive right into the virtual event landscape in 2020 and go into what we discovered from our survey. But actually, before I do that, I would just like to launch a little poll. Thank you. So how many of you are currently running virtual events? I'll give you like 30 seconds or so to answer. We'll see how many people have answered. And then I'm sure Candace will just turn it off when it's mostly done. I'll drink some water.
We have, looks like we have almost 300 responses so far.
Oh, wow.
And climbing pretty fast. I think we'll be ending in a couple seconds. So yeah, get your answers in, everybody.
You guys are fast. Thank you.
Yeah. Quick on the draw, these guys. Pretty good.
You read fast. I talk fast. You read fast.
Awesome. So I think this is pretty much what we're going to get as far as responses go. So I'm just going to go ahead and end the poll, and
Great.
I will share the results so everyone can see.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So interesting results. I can see that 47% of you are already running virtual events. 49% want to, but haven't started yet. Okay, well, that's great. I hope that you find this presentation useful and can see, something to learn from here. And then another 4% of you are not planning to run virtual events. I have to ask, those of you who are not planning on running virtual events, I'm a little surprised that you're at a presentation about virtual events. So please let me know, like, maybe my presentation will convince you that running virtual events is actually a great thing to do. But yeah, let me know in the chat, like, why you're here. And, those of you who are already running virtual events or who are planning on it, please let me know. I hope you learned something, or maybe you have other insights that you want to share as well. All right. So now that we've seen the results from those of you who are at this presentation, I'm going to share the results that we saw for this question in our survey. So this graph shows the percentage of people in our survey who were running virtual events, who weren't planning on it, and who were just like planning on it but hadn't yet. So as you can see here, 5% of people who responded to our survey said that they did not run events in 2019 and they didn't plan to in 2020. So we didn't ask those people any further questions because our survey was really all about events, but we did just want to make sure that we weren't getting results from them that potentially would contaminate our other results. 11% said that they ran in-person events in 2019 and had no plans to run virtual events in 2020. So that's kind of similar to that third group of you there. We also asked more questions to these people about like why they weren't planning on running virtual events. I'm not going to go over that in this presentation, but if you wanted to check out like the challenges they faced and the questions they had, you can see that in the survey. 42% people said that they ran in-person events in 2019 and were planning on running virtual events in 2020. And then another 42% said that they ran in-person events in 2019 and had already run virtual events in 2020. I also do want to mention, forgot to mention this earlier, that we ran this survey through May 2020. So these results are like from May, meaning that 42%, a lot of them will probably already have started running virtual events now, because we're now into August. I'm going to be sharing the rest of the slides when I'm talking about the results. I'm going to be sharing the results from that last group of 42. So those who have already run virtual events and sharing kind of the insights that we got from them. It's really interesting to me that a significant number of you at this presentation actually have not run virtual events yet. I actually expected the number of people who had run virtual events to be higher, because I think based on this graph, it seems like the number of organizations who are running virtual events this year has actually doubled, which is crazy, I think, like just the fact that this is like seeing such a huge growth. And I guess in my mind, I was thinking that maybe a lot of people who were here would have already run virtual events as well, just because that's kind of what our poll was suggesting. But I guess it also shows that there's just so many challenges and complexities associated with running virtual events that it can be hard to get started. So, you can let me know if that's true. And I hope that this graph helps, or the rest of this presentation kind of helps resolve some of those questions that you might have as well. So that's it for the number of organizations who are running virtual events. So next I'm going to go over what kinds of events they're actually running. So I know this is like a big chart, but here we have listed out the different kinds of events that we asked people whether or not they were running those kinds of events. We have the percentage of people who are running them in person versus the percentage of people who are running them virtually. And we also have the difference between those two numbers. So as you can see overall, most of the types of events have a slight decrease. So fewer organizations are running each of those kinds of events. Our standard member meetings, 64% of organizations were running those in person compared to only 58% of organizations who are running them virtually. So they are still the most popular type of event, but there is a slight decrease in the number of organizations who are running them. Same with guest speakers. They were the most popular, they were second most popular in person, and they're still second most popular virtually, but there is a slight decrease. The biggest decreases can be seen in other types of events. So there's like 13% less of those happening. When we asked people to fill in what those kinds of events were, we saw that a lot of them were conferences. So, it kind of makes sense. Maybe people are a little hesitant to run conferences just because there's like so many moving parts. Although again, I think you could consider this a conference and it seems like it's going well. So, it can give you hope if you did want to run a conference. I would say that the other type of other events are a lot of sporting events, because we have like a lot of sporting clubs who responded. And, unless you're going to move to like FIFA, which is like an online soccer game, as opposed to like an actual soccer game, you can't really run sporting events as easily. So it makes sense that there's a decrease there as well. We also saw a big decrease in galas. So 13% fewer organizations were running galas. Again, I think kind of similarly to conferences, they're big events, there's a lot of moving parts. It makes sense that organizations might be a little bit wary of moving them online. I do want to point out though that this result just shows the actual like number of events that are happening. It doesn't show whether or not those events were successful or not. So, don't, just because not everyone is doing it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't do it. I do also want to point out that the only events that increased in popularity virtually were webinars and Q&As. I mean, I guess webinars, like, they're not happening in person anyway, but I think it's more just like in the shift to virtually, more people are running webinars, which makes sense. They're like a simple format. You can just have someone come on and speak, or you can present information. And Q&As have also more than doubled in popularity. So 7% of people are running them in person and 16% are running them virtually. And I think that's because there's a lot of uncertainty happening right now throughout COVID. Organizations want to make sure that they can reassure their members and their donors and like give them a chance to ask them questions to learn what's going on with them. So, if you haven't run a Q&A, it could be a good time to start with that as well. However, as I mentioned, these numbers do not necessarily say which events are the most successful. So we're going to get into that now and see how successful organizations have been in running virtual events. So we have another poll. I would just like to know, how successful were you in reaching the goals that you set for your virtual events? And for those of you who have not run virtual events yet, I would just say like either don't answer, or just say how successful like you feel like you're going to be. So I'll give you a few more seconds. We'll see how fast you guys answer this one.
I know. Pretty fast still. About 175 responses so far.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
200. Looks like it's kind of finishing up. Responses are slowing down a little bit. So I think it's a good time to end and share. Ooh.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
I'm using my two screens. So there we go. Sharing the
Cool.
results.
Okay. So this is great. I'm really happy to see that only 10% of you have been unsuccessful. Although, I'm very sorry for those of you who have felt like you've been unsuccessful. And I hope that maybe some of the insights shared in the chat or shared in this presentation can maybe help you a little bit with that. Good to know. Yeah, most of you feel like you're kind of moderately successful, like it went well, but it wasn't like amazing. And those of you who are very successful, so that 23%, yay, congratulations. I'm really happy to hear that you felt like it was very successful. And again, if you have any insights that you'd like to share with me or with people in the chat, feel free to drop that in. And, I'm sure we'd all love to hear your insights as well. So now I'm going to share the results from our survey as compared to those results. Also, I saw that someone in the chat had asked to, see the link to the report again. I will share that again at our next poll when I have a chance so that you can check that out at the same time if you want to as well. So overall, here are the results from our survey. So interestingly, we saw actually the same percentage of people who are unsuccessful, so only 10%, but actually a higher percentage of people who were highly successful as opposed to those who were moderately successful. So 56% of people actually reported that they were highly successful and 34% that they were moderately successful. So I think that this actually might provide some hope to those of you who have not yet run virtual events. So this means that 90% of people overall were actually successful to some degree, which I think is amazing. Like 90% in anything is like an A+, right? So A+ to everyone who's running virtual events. And I think that, this might also provide some hope. Like you're not even just likely to be moderately successful. You might even be highly successful because, virtual events do provide that additional opportunity for engagement. And it's a great way to try to achieve your goals in a virtual space. So moving on from that, what kind of events were actually likely to be the most successful? So when we actually looked at the events that these kind of organizations were running, what we saw was that the two that came up the most that were run by successful organizations were guest speakers and panel discussions. So those of you who are planning on running virtual events, those might be two different kinds of events that you might want to try online. I can provide some hypotheses as to why those types of events were more successful. I think, guest speakers, it can really help because you're bringing on someone new, someone who is from outside your organization who can provide a different perspective. They might also be able to share your event with their audience and maybe broaden your audience that way. And I think panel discussions, same kind of thing. If you have a really good moderator who's able to ask questions and keep the conversation on track, you might be able to get even more insights because you're really broadening your perspective from that range of people who are in the panel. So let's say our beekeepers are in this presentation or are, taking a look at the report and reading these findings. Based on this, they might decide to bring in a guest speaker from another beekeepers association who's going to talk to them about bee mites. And, she's going to provide the best insights on how the other beekeepers association can keep their events or keep their bees safe from mites. And then just, sharing her expertise that way and sharing it with her audience, she can hopefully help their event be really successful. So that is it for my overview of the virtual event landscape in 2020. So next we're going to move on to how to increase revenue from virtual events and what kind of ticket pricing is happening and all that kind of stuff. So gonna pop into another poll here. How are you pricing tickets for your virtual event compared to how much you charged for your in-person events?
Oh, let me launch it.
I'll just drink some water.
Launched.
Great.
Open for responses.
Yay.
Ooh, coming in hot. Let's see.
There. I also dropped the survey link into the chat as well. Oh, that's cool. Someone is saying in response to the poll, they asked their members what they'd be willing to pay and base the payment structure off of that. I think that's a great idea, because you don't necessarily know. Like you might think that your event should be free, but your members might actually think, no, like I'm willing to pay, I'm willing to support you. So as Ashley said, thank you, Ashley, you don't necessarily have to assume that people, aren't willing to pay.
Awesome. So I think I'm gonna end the poll and share the results.
Cool. Okay, so a lot of you are just hosting in person. So all your events are free. Okay, and then the majority of you after that said less. 14% said you're pricing your tickets the same compared to in person, and 1% said more. So 3 people. Okay, so that's interesting that most of you are already hosting free events. That's pretty consistent with what we saw with our survey as well. So I will share the results for that. Oh, there you go. It flipped over. So as you can see, what we saw from our survey was that a lot of organizations were charging less for their virtual events. So in fact, 30% did charge for in-person events, but did not charge for virtual events. So I think that kind of falls under the same category of just less. 27% said that all of their events were free. So obviously that percentage was slightly higher in this presentation. More of you said that you had all free events. But then, yeah, we segmented a little bit more. So 23% said much less, 12% said slightly less, only 9% said the same, and 0.6 said more. So interestingly, 3 people said they were charging more for virtual events in our survey, and 3 of you also said you were charging more for virtual events. So again, those of you who are charging more, I would be interested to know what your strategy is around that, since most organizations are not doing it, which is not to say that it's a bad decision. It's just to say that maybe there's something that other organizations who are worried about charging can learn from you. Again, I think that all of these kind of results just show that there's really a need to diversify revenue streams. A lot of organizations might have relied on in-person ticket pricing as being like equivalent to a donation back when we were meeting in person. But with virtual events, there might be, people might be a little bit worried about doing that. Although I think one person also put in the chat that they were putting in that their ticket price was like equivalent to donation, or they just asked people to give that as a suggested donation amount, which I think is a great idea. People know that you need their support, especially right now. So, don't be shy to ask. I do also want to point out that because virtual events, I think someone said that they don't have to pay for their speakers' travel fees. Also, you don't have to rent a room, you don't have to pay for food, any of that. So you might actually see a higher ROI because you're not actually having to pay all of those overhead fees. So that might also be reflected in your ticket pricing as well. So if you are not charging for tickets, what are some of the other ways that organizations were making revenue through events? So based on our survey, here are the most frequent tactics that we saw being used to generate revenue for virtual events. So 64% of people said that they were charging for admission. And then the next popular was finding sponsors for their event. This actually surprised me a little bit. Maybe some of you are also often finding sponsors. The only reason this surprised me was because I know from a lot of people that I've talked to that people are often like leery of finding virtual event sponsors. They don't know how to go about it. If that is something you are interested in though, I would again look to this event. I think they did a good job, including sponsors like as speakers or including them within slides and stuff like that. So there definitely are ways that you can find sponsors and adequately promote them in a virtual event, if that is something you were interested in. The next most popular was promoting a donation page, so just kind of a straight ask. And then after that, very few people use these later tactics. I do want to point out, though, that this is only the results from the people who had not yet run virtual events. Those who were still planning on running virtual events actually used a lot more fundraising tactics. So for example, you can see that this group, only 7% was holding an online auction. But in that later group, like those who are still planning on it, 24% planned on running an online auction. So if you did want more insights about revenue generating tactics that were more popular and stuff like that, I would suggest downloading the report and taking a look at which ones were being used later. I do also want to say that I found this interesting because it shows to me that those who are not trying to generate as much revenue from a virtual event clearly have a lot less pressure and are able to run events a lot faster. Because I think obviously putting together a fundraising campaign can be more time consuming. You have to think a lot more about the messaging. Whereas if you're just meeting up with your members in a more casual way, you can probably get that event off the ground a lot faster. So maybe that's what those of you who have yet to run virtual events have also found, that it's taking a little bit longer because you want to make sure you have that messaging right. So I would check out the revenue tactics in that other section as well. But that's not to say that we can't still look at which tactics were successful for this group of organizations. So that's what we're going to look at next. So our next question for our respondents here was how much revenue they generated proportionately to an in-person event at their virtual event. So we asked them that, and then we compared those responses, like the responses to that question, with the tactics that organizations had said they were using. So what we saw from that was that the two tactics that generated the most revenue and helped organizations make either the same amount of money from a virtual event or even more was promoting a donation page throughout the event and selling merchandise for their organization. So for organizations who had already run virtual events, those were the two tactics that stood out in terms of revenue generation. I think the promoting a donation page one honestly makes sense because, again, especially if you're not charging for admission or anything like that, people do expect to be giving to your organization and they do know you're in need, like I mentioned before. So honestly, just making that direct ask, if you have built that relationship with them, is completely valid. And, don't be afraid to do that. I would say selling merchandise is also, that wasn't used by very many organizations, but clearly for those who did try it, it was a successful tactic. I think this maybe ties into the fact that like everyone is shopping online these days. Like people can't get out and, go to stores like they usually would. So if your organization can be the answer to something that they need, they're totally willing to purchase from you instead. I think this also ties back to, I don't know how it is in your areas, but I know in Toronto, there's this huge resurgence of like shop local, like support local. So if you're somehow able to tie that into your messaging about merchandise and stuff like that as well, that can be a really valuable tactic. So in terms of our beekeepers, for their fundraising, what they decided to do was to put together a donation page like the one I'm sharing on this slide. So, just kind of explaining why they're in need, they're a nonprofit, like here's what they need help with, and then just sharing out that donation page with their members throughout their events so that they can start generating more revenue. This is an example that I pulled from a wild apricot customer site, the Worcester Beekeepers Association. So, if you guys are online, thank you for letting me use your donation page. And then if not, yeah, just wild apricot, you can build donation pages like this if that's something you were interested in. Let's say our beekeepers also wanted to put together some merchandise. I found these other two wild apricot customers who are selling polo shirts, the Orange County Beekeepers Association, and little patches. I really like patches, so I'm partial to these ones from the Tillamook Beekeepers Association. So if you can do something like that, like put together something that's branded with like your slogan or your logo or something like that, that's something that people would really want to wear nowadays. Sweatshirts, sweatpants. I'm dressed up today, but that's not always the case, I can say. So I think that if you can really tap into the desire that people have to shop local and support local, as well as making things that they really want to wear or to purchase during these times, that can really help you be successful with your fundraising at virtual events. So, that's what we have for increasing revenue from virtual events. So we've covered like ticket pricing, how you might want to price your events, as well as some ideas to generate revenue. And now we're going to go into that final section. So what kind of attendance organizations are seeing from virtual events and how they're engaging attendees once they're there. So we have our last poll of the day. Thank you, Candace. How many attendees did your virtual event attract compared to how many you saw for equivalent in-person events? So let's say you ran, you had a member meeting in person and you had a member meeting virtually. What was the kind of difference that you saw in attendance? I'll drink some more water. Just give a few more seconds to answering that. Oh, okay. Thank you, Bridget. I did not know that you pronounced it Worcester. So, I guess is it kind of like that sauce? Like
yeah, like
Worcester?
Yeah.
Worcester, yeah. Okay,
Worcester
I did not know that. So, thank you, Worcester.
Cool. Worcester. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Oh.
Okay, great. I
That's
think
funny.
that we got pretty much all the responses. Oh, a couple more. Couple last few coming in. I'll let it get to 200 and I will end the poll.
Worcester. Oh man. It's okay. I mean, I'm from Toronto and we say Toronto, but if you're not from Toronto, you say Toronto, and that's just wrong. So, okay, so we'll get back to our poll results here. Okay, so we can see that it's interesting. You'll see in my next slide when I share a little bit about what kind of results we saw. It's pretty similar to this, actually. It's kind of all over the board. Like here, the biggest percentage is slightly less, but that's like a quarter of people. And then almost a quarter of people also said slightly more. 15% said the same, 22% said much less. So yeah, it's interesting how it's kind of all over the board. Again, those of you who are saying that you saw slightly more or much more, I mean, that's great. So again, if you have any insights on that, please share. Those of you who said much less, I am sorry to hear that. And I hope that these insights can help you with that as well. But so closing that and going on to what we saw from our research report as well, you can see that, again, it's pretty much all over the board in the sense that about 50% of people said that they saw fewer attendees, and then about 50% said that they saw more or the same amount. So that's not to say that there's nothing that you can do to kind of increase your attendees, but it is just something to say that, you know, you can kind of, I think you can kind of roughly predict that you'll have around the same amount if it kind of evens out based on these numbers. What we did see, however, was that maybe some of the reasons that people reported that guest speakers and panel discussions were more successful is because those two types of events, so guest speakers and panel discussions, actually were among the ones that had higher attendance. I think, again, this is probably because people could increase their, you know, that way they're broadening the size of their audience. So, you know, the guest speaker is sharing the event, the panel discussions are sharing the event, the partner organizations, like let's say you wanted to partner with another organization, they can share their event, and then that way you're just really broadening your reach. Something else that we looked at was what percentage of event attendees were previously known. So for example, like maybe you saw fewer attendees, but a lot of those attendees were actually people that did not know about your organization before. So for example, like as you can see here, over 72% of people saw that their virtual event actually attracted new people to their organization. So by previously known, we kind of meant like didn't already subscribe to your newsletter, weren't already donors, hadn't already come to an event. So I think what this shows with this 72% of people who are attracting new people to their events is just that virtual events can be a really great way to broaden your reach because they're happening online. Like people can join from anywhere, people can join at any time. I mean, again, I'm in Canada right now. I'm sure many of you are in Massachusetts. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. And, you know, you're still watching me speak. And we probably would have never had the chance to connect if it were not for this virtual event. So if you can think about that for your virtual event as well, it can maybe help you broaden your reach across the country by, you know, putting as much promotion out there as possible. Because what we really saw was that those organizations who had attracted, you know, a lot of new people to their events, a lot of new people who hadn't already heard about their organization, is that they were just doing like a lot of different kinds of promotion. So they were posting on social media, they were posting on their website, they were sending out email blasts, they were doing paid social ads. So, you know, take advantage of that Google Ads grant there to kind of get a little bit of a boost for your event. And just basically the more different kinds of promotion techniques you used, the better for attracting new attendees. So basically like those who used all of those promotion techniques together were the most likely to see a lot of people who hadn't already heard of their organization come. So now that we've covered what kind of attendance we're seeing, I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can engage attendees and, you know, make the event really accessible and interesting for them once they're there. So as you can see here are the tactics that are most popularly used by respondents of our survey to engage people. So opening up discussion to attendees was the #1 most popular, and holding a Q&A was the #2. And then after that, you can see like a really steep drop off, like holding a survey was like half as popular as the next most popular. And I think that's really interesting because it shows that, you know, opening up discussion and holding a Q&A are both pretty low effort, which is not to say that they're bad. It just means that like, yeah, those are really easy things you can do. But to really make your event even more engaging, you might want to explore one of the other options to make it like pop, to make it like a little bit different from other events that people are seeing. We also saw something that I thought was really interesting, which was that 12% of people did not try to engage attendees throughout their event. So, that means like they didn't open up discussion, they didn't hold a raffle, they didn't do anything. And I am just here to say that, please always engage attendees at your virtual events. This is something that's really important because based on our survey, let's go back, back to the beginning when I said that 10% of organizations were unsuccessful. Well, when organizations did not try to engage attendees, that number jumped to 25%. So that's like 150% increase in organizations who were unsuccessful if they did not try to engage attendees. So, that's a huge difference. Again, those of you who potentially were unsuccessful before, that is one of the things that we saw was the biggest factor. So if you can really try to engage attendees, open up discussion, hold some surveys, that's something that's really important. And now I'll go into the tactics that we actually saw were the most successful, so you know like which ones to try first. So those two tactics, hosting a live hangout before and after the event, as well as holding a survey, were the two that we saw that were the most successful. So hosting a live event, even though only 14% of people used that tactic, it was actually used, like 73% of the organizations who used it were successful. So again, that's like way more than the organizations who used it who were unsuccessful, which is, amazing news. That's something that you can also do relatively easily. Just, make sure that you have like little breakout rooms, create little video calls for your supporters and let them talk. And that's like, a great way to help them build connections as well as help them feel engaged in your event. The number 2 most successful tactic was actually holding a survey. That's why I did so many polls, guys. So, if you want to launch some polls throughout your event, it helps get people talking, it helps people share their experiences, and it helps people feel a lot more heard. And, also for me as a speaker, it helps me see what you are all thinking and, helps me know that my presentation is actually, resonating with you. So that's really important. Yeah, so I'd also say just, any of these tactics are great. You can use all of them. You can use a couple of them, but definitely do try to engage attendees throughout your event. So just to give a quick summary, let's say we'll go back to our beekeepers. So if I'm organizing an event for them, I would probably try to get a guest speaker to come in from a different beekeepers association or a different beekeepers organization in general, so that they can share their expertise and also hopefully share it with their audience. In terms of revenue, I would, ask my members what they are comfortable paying in terms of generating revenue through ticket pricing, and then maybe also sell some branded merchandise and share a donation page throughout the event. Because again, people are happy to give if you ask them and they know that your organization is in need. In terms of engaging members, we would host a happy hour before the event to allow members to mingle. Again, happy hour does not have to be alcohol. Could also just be coffee. This morning we could maybe have, like, let's say they were having their event in the morning, they could have a little breakfast with locally made honey from their beekeepers and, incorporating their members and making them feel engaged in that way. And also opening up a discussion for small groups at the end so that they could ask the speaker what they thought and, maybe get some advice from them, help them feel engaged that way. Overall, I didn't really go into like setting up a virtual event in this talk. But what we did hear from a lot of commentary from the people who responded to our survey was that they really recommended you practice a lot. Just make sure you're very familiar with the technology. Make sure that you know how to use it, that there are no hiccups the day of. If your members are not super technologically savvy, something you might also want to do is walk them through how to use the technology. That's just some advice that we came through in our survey. And just try to relax and have fun. I had fun talking about this. I think virtual events are really interesting. I hope that you found it interesting too and that you learned something. And that is it for me. So now I can see that there are a few questions in that Q&A box and also some stuff in the chat. So I guess we have I have like 5 minutes, right? It's until 10:15.
Yeah. So 5-ish minutes to kind of power through some of these questions. Okay. Did any jump out at you that you just wanted to take off the bat, or I can pull out a few too?
Yeah, I don't know if I can open the Q&A box. I'm clicking on it, but it's not popping up on my screen.
I will go ahead and just, so Jane asked, what type of virtual events did you find were the most successful?
So what I personally find the most successful are events when there is a lot of opportunity for engagement. So I think anything that involves a discussion has been really helpful to me. Like I know, like I work in marketing and I'm part of a group. I'm part of a Slack group that does content marketing talks. And the ones that I've found the most interesting are the ones where the person is providing like their expert opinion, but there's also an opportunity to ask them a lot of questions at the end, and there's an opportunity to discuss with your peers about the topic. Because then I find like when I can ask questions and when I can discuss it with people, that's when I like really learn, not just necessarily like listening to someone talk. So that's what I would
Absolutely.
say.
Yeah, perfect. And then Rachel asks, I'm wondering if there is any finding with Zoom fatigue where it is becoming harder to get attendees with everyone working from home, kids home from school.
Yeah.
Is it going to get tougher for people to join a virtual event? What are your thoughts?
So my personal feeling is that yeah, like I actually agree with that. I definitely have found that I've been having like fewer personal calls with friends because I'm like I love you, but also I cannot stare at a screen anymore. So, all of you who are feeling that way, I hear you and I completely agree. However, my feeling is just that there won't be any other choice, to be honest. Like throughout the winter, I don't know how all of you are doing. I personally am not going anywhere. Like I have not eaten at any restaurants. I'm not going to any patios. Yeah. Oh, Melissa is saying we are waiting till late fall when our event. Yeah, people aren't going to be going anywhere. Like they're just not going to have any options. So I think what we might be seeing is maybe a dip in the summer, when people can still, get out and talk, and same with the fall. But I think when it's winter and we're all stuck inside, like I think there's going to be kind of a resurgence in interest in virtual connections and stuff like that. So yeah, sitting here patiently listening is painful. Yeah, I'm sorry, John, but I feel you. Yeah. Oh, we live in the Toronto area. Oh, hi, David. Nice. Yeah. See, not driving in the winter for meetings. Being not having to worry about like getting stuck in the snow, all that kind of stuff.
So, Eamon asks, what is the best number of speakers you need for a virtual event? And what is the ideal time for a virtual event? What are your suggestions?
I think honestly, it really depends. Because I would say if it's just one speaker, like for this presentation, I would not have wanted to do more than an hour because I feel like, as exciting as I think I am, I think you would have all been bored to tears if you had to listen to me talk for 2 hours. However, if you're having an event that's like, maybe like let's say you wanted to run a virtual gala and you wanted to have like a presentation, like kind of a talk, but you also had maybe like a performance of some kind, and you also wanted to have, like a chance for people to interact, people to mingle, I think you could easily have that for a few hours and
Mm-hmm.
it would be fine because it's like I think as long as you can make your event engaging, it can be a couple of hours. Like I maybe not like, but then even again, like this is 2 days and it is still like it's still engaging because you have breaks between the sessions. You have a chance to interact with people. So I think as long as you are providing those opportunities for engagement, it can still be longer. In terms of number of speakers, again, I think it just really depends on the type of event. Like if you're having a panel discussion, actually the one thing I would say is you would not want to have too many people because I've been in panel discussions where there's been like 10 people and then like no one has the chance to speak. So I would say that in terms of panel discussions, maybe don't have more than like 4 or 5 people. But if you're hosting an all day event with all sorts of different speakers, then yeah, you can totally have like, if everyone's presenting like a 30-minute talk, you could totally have like 10 people because it would just be all different subjects and that would maintain engagement and keep it interesting. So sorry,
Awesome.
that was a lot of
Yeah, no, that
information,
was
but I
great.
hope it still helped.
Yeah, and and someone Anna asked, are any platforms better for engagement?
Honestly, I actually am really liking this Zoom for engagement just because I have not seen, I've used GoToWebinar before, but I haven't seen where the panelists as well as the attendees have been able to chat like this. I am not super familiar with virtual event platforms, so do not take this as me selling Zoom. But I would also like to say that, yeah, like anything where you can launch polls, anything where you can see people's faces while they're presenting, and anything where you can have this chat, I think those are kind of really valuable components.
Oh, I was muted. Awesome. Thank you so much, Tatiana. If you want to stay on, if you have a few more minutes, there's plenty of Q&As, submissions still there, or just, responding to people in the chat if you feel. Otherwise, I would love to have us paste in the link to your report so people can access that and download that. And I also recommend following up with Tatiana with all of your virtual event questions. And also, I'm happy to help as well. We have a ton of events that are virtual events that are run on CosVox. So I can send a few tips your way. I actually did a course on how to plan and execute a virtual event. So if you're interested, we can also probably dig up that link and put that in the chat as well. The course is a paid course, so that's there. We also did a webinar on interviewing 2 organizations on how they ran their virtual events. So happy to see if I can dig up those links for you and paste them in the chat as well. But yeah, thank you so much, Tatiana. All of these insights that you shared have been so interesting. Thanks for everyone for responding to the polls.
Yeah, honestly. Yeah, I just want to say a couple of people mentioned that they would like my contact info. Please add me on LinkedIn. I don't think I'll have the chance to go through all of the Q&A right now, but if you did have any questions for me, like, feel free to ask me on LinkedIn and I can do my best to answer. I will also say, check out the report. And we're also putting out a lot of content over at Wild Apricot to kind of support this report. Like, we just put out a list of stats about it. We're also going to be releasing a list of other kind of content about it later this week. And I'm going to be hosting a Q&A on September 10th. So if you sign up for Targeted Impact over on the Wild Apricot site, I would say that is, where you can ask me all of your questions. I'll actually stop sharing now, and then I can drop the link to that into the chat as well. So if you had any live questions for me, you can just sign up for that when it comes around as well.
Perfect. And I just pasted in the links to your LinkedIn so they can follow up with you. And then support@cosvox.com if you have any questions for us. That's where you can reach us. And yeah, we'll also paste in that link to the report. So thank you again. I appreciate you taking the time. This has been really great and so insightful. Thank you for
appreciate it.
Being a part of it. Yeah, awesome.
Thank you so much.
All right, Tatiana.
Thanks.
Take care. Have a good rest of your day.